panelist and collaborator for this event. We have Christina Amini. One really special thing about having Christina for this particular event is that she was a collaborator of Susan OMalley. So she has added insight and context that really no one else could give. A little bit about Christina Amini. She's also the executive publishing director of Chronicle Books, where she supervises numerous categories, including art. So it's a real pleasure to have you here as well, Christina. And I just wanted to start by reading a quote by Lee Feinstein. And it's a quote she wrote about Susan OMalley, or part of one. And she wrote, "But the fun in her work belies the underlying deeper message. Art can change the world if it can show us how to reframe it, how to reframe what we see and accept too easily as the truth." So I loved that quote. And I do believe art can change the world, and makes me think a lot about Susan OMalley's work. We're going to start with a picture of Susan OMalley that I believe, Christina, you took that picture.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say a little bit about it?
This was a photo that at the San Jose Art Museum, and Susan was in the mid-practice here. She was in the middle of an art project where she would give you a cupcake, and then you would both blow out the candle and make a wish. And so it was in that scene that I took a photo of Susan.
I love it. Okay, well, let me read a little bit about Susan OMalley as a bio to enter this slideshow and discussion. Susan OMalley, who lived from 1976 to 2015, was an internationally exhibited artist and curator based in the San Francisco Bay Area. As curator and print director at the San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art, she worked with hundreds of artists and organized more than 50 exhibitions and public programs. As a social practice artist, she made work that brings a sense of interconnectedness to our lives. From posters to pep talks, billboards to vending machines, OMalley's art uses simple and recognizable tools of engagement to connect people to one another. In her advice for My 80-Year-Old Self project, she interviewed people of all ages, transformed their words into bold artwork that has been shared widely as a book, prints, public installations on view at Root Division in San Francisco, the San Francisco International Airport, Artwork Cincinnati, and at 1950 Addison in Berkeley. OMalley's project, A Healing Walk, is permanently installed at Villa Montalvo. The impact of OMalley's work has traveled wide and far. Her artwork has been exhibited in public projects across the United States, San Francisco, New York, Nashville, around the globe in the United Kingdom, Poland, and Denmark. Her work has been exhibited at alternative spaces and cultural institutions, including in California, SF MoMA, Oakland Museum of California, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, the San Diego Airport, the Montalvo Art Center, Kayla Art Institute, and Palo Alto Art Center, as well as the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston, Texas, and the Parthenon Museum in Nashville, Tennessee. Her participatory installation, Finding Your Center, a collaboration with Lee Rosenberg, was featured in Bay Area Now 7 at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and the powerful optimism of her work lives on. So with that, let's go into the next slide. And this is where I think it would be great for Christina to enter in, and as we run through the slides, give a little context about her work. Again, I think one thing that's very special about having Christina participate is that she was an actual collaborator, and she has context and added, clues and history to add that we might not otherwise gather. So can you tell us a little bit about this?
Sure.
And that's you, right?
That's me. I'm on the left. Susan's on the right. Susan was in the very first social practice program at CCA, California College of Art. And so Susan asked me if I wanted to start a pep talk squad with her. And so I said, well, sure, of course, I would do anything with Susan. And I didn't really know what it meant, and neither of us did, but we knew that what we wanted to do was to give pep or encouragement. And of course, as part of a pep talk squad, naturally you have to wear matching red sports jackets. And so we would ask strangers in parks, at galleries, in front of a supermarket, if there was anything they needed pep or encouragement on. And the kind of amazing thing is that people would say yes, and then they would really open up and share their real vulnerabilities with us. So in the next slide, you can see that we are talking with people and listening to them. So one of us would type and the other one would ask questions. And then a key part of the pep talk was at the end, we would cheer for them. So we would be like, yay, person. And you can see us doing that there.
I love the idea of giving a round of applause within the context of contemporary art. I think that's really beautiful because there's so little of that in the art world where it's mostly quiet listening or watching. So I even love the aspect of noise and noisiness. But one of the things I wrote about was the act of listening as part of an artistic practice. I think that's really interesting too. And I think this piece had both of those components.
Yeah, we received such positive responses from people because it was so interesting. So rarely are just people just fully listened to and then cheered for. And so it was kind of amazing to us. The reason why we kept on doing the pep talk squad at all these various locations was because it kept providing meaning, and like the silliness allowed people to be vulnerable. So this project, Susan was a social practice artist, and she was from a suburb called Willow Glen in San Jose. And so this project came to be because she declared herself the San Jose artist in residency, the San Jose artist in residence in this suburb. And she left notes at people's doors, letting them know that. And her constraints that she gave herself was that she wanted to do something. She wanted to use the materials that she had, and she wanted to not be destructive. But you can see she kind of playfully reimagines the front yards of these folks in San Jose. There's a couple examples here. Whether it's rearranging the leaves to go with the Christmas tree, or in the next slide, looking at how the frost on the grass kind of looks like an alien invasion there. And it makes you wonder, how did she get it so that her footprints aren't on the way out?
I do wonder that. How did she?
I don't know how she did that one. And then she also did videos as well, where she was interacting with some of the kind of lawn ornaments or highly decorated shrubs.
Yeah, and this work also, as I mentioned the other day, it makes me think about labor in the urban or ex-urban environment. And I know you had mentioned it makes you think about kind of urban development too.
Mm-hmm. Susan was an urban studies. Oh, I love this one where she like comes up and jumps at it like it's a pom pom. You can see, you know, just like she's interacting with her surroundings and community in an interesting way. So I met Susan at Stanford, where we were both undergrads, and she was an urban studies major, not an art major. And so I think there was always this interest in communities and people and kind of coming together, may it be with a fire hydrant or whatnot. Yeah. Her sister Ellen was the cinematographer for this as well.
I love it.
And so, as you can see, there's kind of this like through line of humor throughout Susan's work too. It's humorous and earnest, but then also like makes you see things in a different way, which is what I love about art. I mean, that these amazingly shaped hedges turn into an obstacle course.
This is actually a piece that will be at the ZMA it will be above a door and on a glass pane. So do you want to say a little?
Yeah, it's photographed here as part of a show called, it's kind of a happening called Moment to Moment that was curated by the Thing Quarterly. And you can see all the different public installations of her work. This one is in a Muni Station in the Castro in San Francisco. And then there were also installations Here it is in New York at the Bedford Avenue stop, where her work is, it just speaks to you from whether it's on a pillar or on a sign. And she called these mantras for the urban dweller. So imagining that someone might say them to themselves, or it's a whisper or something they say to someone else. She was really interested in her art being public and shared and the dissemination of it. Here, this one is at the Art Moves Festival in Poland. And so you can see that her work here is at huge billboard scale. And this is exactly the kind of, the way that Susan's work speaks to you so directly and with boldness and color.
So a question I have for you is, you mentioned color and how bold the pieces are. And I was wondering about not only the use of messaging, but also the use of color as an aesthetic or political tool.
Mhm.
Can you say anything about that?
Well, I think it plays with kind of the vernacular of advertising
Hmm.
that, there's something about it that almost seems like, get it here now for free, or, like she was interested in that kind of language as well, and how, um, I guess, how that works. I think the color too makes it so approachable. Susan was a curator, an art teacher, and an artist. And so and she also had been a salesperson at a gallery. So she had all these different ways in which she was a buyer, a seller, a consumer, and a creator of art. And I think because of that, she also kind of, was aware of the kind of self-seriousness of the art world. And sometimes you can see in the color and in the simplicity breaks out of that she was not just wanting to create kind of art for the elite, but art for everyone.
Oh, I love these pieces because I think they speak to um, the way her work could operate in multiple languages and cultures, and the act of translation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And one thing that you and I had talked about was about, um, I guess, language and about identity as well. So, so Susan was half Mexican. Her mom, Guadalupe Reina, was um, Mexican and Native American, Tejana from Texas, and her dad, Patrick O'Malley, was of very Irish. And so Susan was mixed race, and both, but also she passed as white. She could live in the world and understood her privilege as a white person. Um, Her mom spoke Spanish. Susan later learned Spanish, and also, I think what's interesting is that I mean, because she's mixed race, I guess she worked more toward studying Spanish and participating in kind of community building. That was, she was interested in working with and for communities of color in her work as well. And so I think in seeing this work where it's in Polish, I believe, that she's interested in connecting to a lot of different people with her work, and that her work translates is a really beautiful thing.
Mhm. And her estate is pretty young. That was one of my interests in supporting you guys. But you, as a body of supporters of Susan's work, you're interested in having it
Oh,
work
definitely. I
different
think
cultures and different languages too.
exactly my interest so I was Susan's best friend and also a collaborator, and she passed away far too early at age 38. And so now, as the steward of her work, I'm interested in sharing her work widely, making it accessible, and bringing it in the best light. And in the what Susan and doing it in the way that would be in the spirit of Susan's work, which is broad distribution, whether it's in other languages, where it's on billboards or on murals, these things that are publicly accessible. And that's what I love about it being at the ZMA, is that you'll be able to even see it just from the outside.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. That's one thing I'm really excited about too.
Yeah.
So I started curating this this solo project by Susan last year, before the pandemic. But what I love about her work is that the pandemic does not change the way it functions, really, because it's going to be installed mostly on exterior windows, so people can still engage with the work whether or not a shelter in place is in effect. And I think there's something really beautiful about that. Oh. And this piece makes me think about an aspect of her work, which is about healing. And I'd like to hear about that a little bit. I know her work we identify it with positivity, generosity, enthusiasm, but I also think there's an aspect of loss and grief and maybe even trauma in her work. So could you talk about that a little, Christina?
So Susan's mom was diagnosed with, let's see, it's AMS, a rare and terminal neurological disease, and Susan's mom was young; she was in her 60s, and so that was one of the things that made Susan switch from being a curator to a full-time artist. It was like, okay, this is the life that I have. Here's what I want to do. And she was an artist in residence at Montalvo Center for the Arts. And this was a piece that she created called A Healing Walk. And I think she created it for others and for herself. So this walk goes up a mountain and it ends up on a vista in Saratoga. And at each moment, there's about 6 signposts along the way. Like there's this one that says this beautiful moment. And then there's another one that's like at the base of some redwood trees and it says, you look up. And then at the very top here, right before you reach the summit, it says, you are here, awake and alive. And it's just such a beautiful piece and a reminder to be in the present moment. And so she created this piece when she was at Montalvo. And we ended up having Susan's memorial at Montalvo, in part because they had been such an amazing collaborator and supporter of her work throughout her life. And also in that they decided to install permanently this piece. So that's there right now and will be. So that even after Susan's memorial, which was on this huge lawn, that people could take this individual healing walk. And it was really kind of amazing because it was like that Susan had created the healing that we would all need, that we were walking kind of in single file. It allowed you to like move through something but yet be with maybe a couple other people, and then reach a beautiful vista at the top and just have that reminder of you're here, awake and alive. So you could feel Susan's presence, and you still can.
And that's also something that reminds me of the timelessness of her work, because I feel like her work is still what you need. Like
it's so true.
The piece we're installing at ZMA says it is possible. And I even think like that messaging is so true for today. Like, so I find her work to be so timely at any given time.
It just feels like she's there or her work is there when you need it, in terms of like, you can turn to her and it's this, or the work, and it's a voice of reassurance, positivity. And it's not all kind of light and fluff. There's a depth and resilience in her work as well.
And a rigor.
Yeah.
It's a rigor that's not usually recognized as rigor, but it's definitely there. Nice. Yeah, I wanted to talk with you about these. You said this was a precursor to the body of work that we're showing at ZMA.
So these are community advice posters. There's Susan on the left, and she's staple gunning some posters to a telephone pole in Palo Alto, all up and down in Embarcadero in Palo Alto. And you can see how she's, putting her work in all of these different public places. So this is the community advice poster series, which she had block printed by a master printer and using his wood block. And then yes, it led then to the next project, which was where advice for my 80-year-old self, where she asked people of all different ages, from young to old, what advice their 80-year-old self would give their current self of today. And as she wrote, I pulled it from the introduction of her book. Imagine you had the opportunity to time travel and meet yourself at 80, to sit down and have a cup of tea with your 80-year-old self. You look into her eyes, which are really your older, wiser eyes. It's a strange experience because this person feels so familiar, but is also very different. She's older and has seen and experienced things that you don't know. And so it's like this way that people could access their own wisdom. And then Susan took their words and transformed them uh, with text and color.
1 Minute Smile is a work that ZMA will be circulating through social media. I really love this piece. Emily has actually been working on recreating that through the use of the slides along with Christina and myself. Emily, would you like to say anything about recreating this work?
It's been an absolute pleasure to just get to experience Susan's work and her message. I would say it's been a really uplifting project to work on during this time, and I found it very profound, during this time of being quarantined and cooped up in my living room and working from home. It really has been a really nice daily reminder of staying present and being positive, and how the act of smiling really can change your perspective. So thank you for this opportunity.
Christina, did you ever actually do the 1 Minute Smile?
I did do the 1 minute smile, and it was a hard 1 minute smile, I will say, because it was there was a kind of a art memorial for Susan too. There was a kind of family and friends memorial, and then there was an art memorial at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, and we did do the 1 minute smile in honor of Susan, and it was like, you're kind of smiling through tears. And the 1 minute smile was inspired because she asked her mom to, and this was, I think, one of her most beautiful collaborations. She asked her mom to write down advice for her. And as her mom's kind of health and abilities were diminishing, her mom could barely write anymore. So in the piece, you can see how her mom's handwriting is getting smaller and smaller. But this is one of the pieces. I love you, baby. Susan's mom, Lupe, wrote this 3 times that says, I love you, baby. I love you, baby. And it was, sort of the things that both Lupe and Susan needed to hear. And one of the other things that Lupe wrote was trick your brain and smile. And so that was part of the inspiration for the piece, was like, if it takes more energy to frown than to smile, smile. And it was also inspired. Linda Montano was an inspiration to Susan, and Montano did a happiness piece where she photographed herself smiling every day for a month in 1973. And so Susan wanted to create this 1 minute smile that she performed at Montalvo Art Center, and in a very in a generous and tender audience, and who, they giggle and they laugh, and it's like a kind of a really sweet thing to do with a group. And now this I love you, baby is going to actually be a billboard in San Francisco, going up probably next week in the Mission District, which again was commissioned long before this crazy pandemic. But now it's like the way that Susan's work continues to speak to people, but now more than ever. This was a piece nearby Kala Art Institute. It was in collaboration with Kala, and they had already been planning to create this mural. Outside of Bob's Machining Company. Bob agreed that this would be a great spot for it. And less internet, more love was one of the pieces of advice from someone's 80-year-old self to their current self. And so this mural is there on San Pablo in Berkeley. But Susan passed away before it was finished. So then her family and close friends gathered, and we were the ones who finished the painting of it.
It's beautiful. How long was this piece up, or was it permanent?
You know, it's not permanent, but it was up for about 6 months, I think.
Okay, nice.
And this was another, like, the way it was a great setting for Susan's work, because she, interacting with real neighborhoods, real communities, like it was on San Pablo Avenue, this exact street, where she often interviewed people about what advice their 80-year-old self would give to their current self. So it was connected to the work.
Yeah, something you said earlier and in our conversations that I've been thinking about has been this engagement of a kind of slippage of consumption,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is something that appeals to me about her work, and how you mentioned earlier that she had worked at these various facets as like a salesperson in a gallery, a curator, an artist. So she understood these different roles. I think the work shows this kind of comfort or ease or maybe even nimbleness,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a good word, of how ephemeral works can behave in even like permanent and impermanent exhibition situations. So it does make me think a lot about consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And this
And
is
she was,
you at Mills Museum.
yep, this is right outside of Mills Art Museum.
And
And that's me on the left.
is it Stacy on the right?
That one is Lee Feinstein from the
Oh,
quote that you read at the very beginning.
oh, nice.
And Lee Feinstein was Susan's boss at one of the galleries that she worked at, and then also then became kind of an art and life mentor for Susan.
I know this wall very well. So this was one of the first colleges I taught at. And I actually curated a show at Mills Art Museum. And that was a special place for me as well. I love that image.
Yeah. I've been thinking of that piece in particular a lot these days.
Yeah. Do things that matter to your heart. I love this piece.
So Susan passed away in 2015. And then in 2016, we coordinated, we called it Team Susan Art. So I gathered a writer, curator, some of her collaborators, her husband, and me to make decisions about the future of Susan's work. So Team Susan Art pitched and landed the Art on Market Street poster series. So that went all up and down Market Street, were advice for my 80-year-old self posters that are at huge scale. So that spring, there were the posters up and down Market Street. Her book came out. Her work was at SF MoMA. And we called it the Spring of Susan. This is a mural that was done in Cincinnati. So Susan's nephew, who was in high school, and he was doing his like final Boy Scouts or Eagle Scouts project. And what he wanted to do was to get one of Susan's pieces as a mural. And so with the help of his mom, they figured out that they could coordinate with Artwork Cincinnati, which is an amazing organization that works with mentor artists and youth artists. And those youth artists interviewed people in the neighborhood about what pieces they would want, and also what advice their 80-year-old self would give to their current self. And then together, the youth artists and the mentor artists, who were all paid and funded by Artwork Cincinnati and by the Susan OMalley Foundation, that they created this beautiful piece in the West End of Cincinnati. And you can see pictured in front of it, that's Susan's family who flew out to be there for the opening of it, and also the youth artists and mentor artists.
And I want to thank you for your time and for your insight. It's really rare that you get to hear from an actual collaborator, an actual participant, a friend, but also someone who has a background in publishing. So I feel like you have so much to add to this conversation. And I thank you for all the assistance you've given ZMA